Now that we've mastered maps, the perfect next step is to learn how to get the user's location. This is obviously a very powerful thing to be able to do and opens up the possibility of an endless range of location-based apps. So, without further ado, let's get going straight away. So new project, and we can go back to our API 22 this time. I'll call it location demo. So yeah, you can stick with 21 if you might want to use maps later on, but we're just going to be using location for now. We're going to leave maps behind for the moment. And so we'll have a blank activity and create it in just the normal way. All right, here we go. We're not going to be customizing the user interface much here. We're going to be very much focusing on the Java side of things. All right, so we've got a fair bit to do. And the first one is to implement a new class. Now, we haven't done that before, so that's quite exciting. We do that with the implements keyword, and the class that we want to introduce is location listener. So what that does is essentially allows our class to use all of the methods and variables in the location listener class. So that's all we're doing. It's a bit like importing a framework as we've done up there. So as you can see, we've got the red line. You might be able to anticipate that that's because we're missing some default methods of the location listener class. So we'll just implement those. So we've got on location changed, on status changed, on provider enabled, on provider disabled. Most of those are fairly obvious what they do, but let's go and have a look at them in more detail. So on location changed is the main one that we're going to use. This essentially gives you the new location as soon as it's been updated. So if you wanted to track a user's location on a map, for example, you would use this class here, and this would be called every time the user's location was updated. On status change, we don't actually use very much, but it's called when, for example, the user's location becomes available after it hasn't been available for a while, or vice versa. But generally more reliable are to use on provider enabled and on provider disabled. So these are the methods that we'll use. This one we'll use to know when the GPS location is available, and this one to know when it's become unavailable. So if the user turns off their GPS or something like that. Okay, so those are the methods that we've been gifted with our location listener class. We're going to have a global variable set up now called location manager, or it's have a type of location manager, and we'll call it location manager as well. So if you've worked with location on another platform such as iOS, you'll know that there's something very similar there, and location manager essentially allows us to access the user's location and all sorts of information about it throughout this class. We start by setting up our location manager, which we do by getting a system service, and the service name is context.location service. So you can more or less guess what that's doing. So remember, the context is the context in which the app is running, so either the phone or the emulator, and then the location service is obviously the service which gives you the location within that. We then just need to cast that to a type of location manager, which is what we need to be able to use it. Okay, our next job is to decide how we're actually going to get the user's location. On Android phones, there's usually two ways to get the location, either using the GPS or using the network or Wi-Fi locations. Normally, we prefer to use the GPS if possible because it's more accurate, but quite often that might be turned off. So we want to have the backup option of being able to use the network location if possible. So we're going to do that by creating a global string called provider, which is going to be where we store the name of the location provider. So whether it be the GPS or the network location. And then we take our provider and set it equal to location manager dot get best provider. That does very much what it says on the tin, and we'll get the best provider that's available at the time. Now we can send some criteria because we might deem the best provider to be the one that uses the lowest electricity, for example, rather than the one that gives the most accurate location. So we can set various criteria here using a criteria variable. I'm just going to leave that empty for the moment, and we'll use the default criteria, which is almost always the best one to go for anyway. But if you want to specify a particular type there, you can do that using this criteria variable. Then we have a Boolean to say whether we want to return only enabled providers. I normally use false here because we'll check to see ourselves whether the provider is available anyway. And since the user may make it available by whatever means in between asking for a provider and then trying to get the location, it makes sense, I think, to get the best provider here and then check whether it's available later on. All right, we're getting close. The next step is to get the last known location of the user. So this is stored on the phone regardless of whether they have their location active right now, and is very useful to get a quick fix of where the user is likely to be. So it might take a few seconds, for example, for the GPS to come on and get a new location, but it's likely that they haven't moved too far from the last known location on the phone. So we can use this as a kind of temporary store for our location. So we'll create a location variable, which I'll have a type of location and a name of location. And we get that from location manager.get last known location. And we need to specify a provider. So we specify the provider that we have. And you can see we've got a handy error there. That's because we haven't yet added the necessary permissions to get the location. We can actually use Android Studio to put those in for us. Automatically, you could see there were 2 there. And let's just jump over to the manifest to see what's been added. I only added the 1. So I'm going to add 2. We've got 2 permissions here: access course location, so the inaccurate location. And normally you're going to want to get the accurate version as well. So that's access fine location. So I definitely recommend having both of those in there to get the best location you can. So then we'll do a quick check to see if we've got a location. So if location is not null, then for now we'll just log location info, location achieved. And then if it is null, then we'll log that. No location, sad face. All right. So we're nearly done. What I'm going to do is just fill in on location changed for now. So as I mentioned, this is the important one, which will allow us to get the user's new location as soon as a new location has been reported by the phone. So what we'll do is we'll set up a double called lat, which is going to be location.get latitude. And you can see there's all sorts of exciting information there that we can get from the location. It's not just latitude and longitude, but we can get the bearing, we can get the speed, and all sorts of other things, which we'll be seeing in a app that we're going to make in a couple of videos time. But for now, we'll just get the latitude. And of course, we'll do the same for the longitude. And for now, we'll just log them. Lat. And then to string. And same for longitude. All right. Now we're nearly there. there's a couple of methods I'm going to add, and the first is on resume. So there it is, predict that and it will give you a bunch of boilerplate code, which is very handy. On resume, as you can imagine, happens when the app has been put into the background and then reactivated. And when that happens, we want to make sure that location updates are still requested. So we do that using location manager.request location updates. And it doesn't really matter which one you select, but that's the one we're going to be using. So that's the one with a provider, first of all, which of course is the provider that we're using for everything. And then there's a minimum time. So this is the minimum time, there we go, between location updates. So a fairly standard number is 400, which is 400 milliseconds, so just under half a second. But if you didn't need very accurate or very regular updates, you could save the user's battery by requesting updates less frequently. And then you can request the number of meters between updates as well. So if the user isn't moving very much, you probably don't really care. So if we have a location update every 1 meter, that's probably fine. And again, if you didn't need anything particularly accurate, you could change that to maybe 100 meters, and that would save the user's battery once again. And finally, we have to give the context for the location update, and that is just this, so the app context. All right, one more method to go, and that is on pause, which, as you can imagine, is when the app is stopped or put into the background, and it's polite to stop getting the user's location when your app is put into the background. And we do that using location manager.remove updates and this. All right. Now that's everything done from a coding point of view. So let's run our app. We do have a few other slightly fiddly things to do. And I just want to point out here that it's really important that you run a device with, just click down there and I'll show you, with Google Play devices installed. So just as we saw a couple of videos with the maps, it won't work if you don't have that one. But you can use API 22 this time. So I'd recommend doing that if you can. Okay, so just scrolling here. There we go. Location achieved. So good news for me. You might even want to do a search for location info there, and that will then only show you the ones that we're logging here. Apart from latitude and longitude, maybe I should have chosen location info for those as well. In fact, for our next run, maybe let's pop those in there. My tag's too long there, so maybe I'll just change that to LNG and lat. We'll just run that again so that we can see the logs a lot more clearly than we could otherwise. Okay, so once again, we've got our location, which is great. Notice that we haven't actually had the location printed to the logs because the location is only printed to the logs when it's changed, and our location hasn't changed. So now you might be wondering, how are we going to actually change the location or affect the location of our app? If you've worked with iOS development, you know that there's you can use in the emulator to simulate certain locations. Unfortunately, there isn't a similar method in Android, and what we need to do is slightly more fiddly, but it'll work fine. Just one thing I want to point out, if you haven't got the location achieved at this point, obviously check that you've got Google Play services in your SDK, but also just worth having a look in the settings, which are somewhere around here. There they are. And just going down to location and making sure that location is enabled in your settings. So it must be on there. And you should see your app here. So you can see one I was practicing with earlier, and this is the one that we're using. So if you don't see that, there's probably a problem with your code, or maybe you forgot to add the permissions or something like that. But as long as that's all okay, this should work fine. Okay, so how are we going to update the location on our phone. We don't run around with our laptop. We have to update it manually. Now, on a Mac, this means running the terminal, which I do using Command Space to bring up Spotlight and then just typing terminal. If you're on a PC, you can use the command line, which you can get by clicking the Start button and typing CMD for command. If you have any problems with that, then just do a quick Google of how to open the command line in Windows, and you've got instructions there and lots of guides which may be slightly different for different versions of Windows. So follow those if you need to, and then once you get there, we need to connect to our emulator from the command line, which may sound like wizardry, but it's not too tricky. We use a program called Telnet, which is essentially a program for communicating between different, in this case, virtual machines. And so we're going to Telnet to a device which is on our machine. So we use localhost for that. And then we have to tell it the port of the device, which conveniently is given to us in the emulator window up there. So in my case, it's 5554. So 5554, and then with any luck, you'll be connected to the Android console. So now this is actually a really powerful thing. I'm not going to go into it in great depth, but we can do all sorts of things with our emulator here. We can restart it, we can install apps, we can delete apps, control our phone in any way we like, really. The main thing that I'm going to do is update the location. And we do that using the command geofix, and then whatever we want the new latitude and longitude to be. So let's say we just want a latitude of 5 and a longitude of 10. Then OK, and you can see, fantastic. Straight away, our latitude and longitude have been updated on our phone. So if we change this command to zoom the map in differently, then that would happen. So that's how it works. It's slightly fiddly, but that's how we update the location on our phone. So just to try another one. Geofix, it goes back maybe to 00, and then that would update the latitude and longitude on our phone. Obviously, in a real device, it would be walking around that would update the latitude and longitude. We're just simulating that here. All right, so that's pretty much it. I'm just going to set you a little challenge for the last part of this video, and that is, often we want to get the user's location at a specific point in our app rather than when it's just updated. So we've actually seen the code to do that already. So my challenge is for you to set up a button which says update location, and then as soon as you tap that button, the location is printed to the console in a latitude and longitude format, much like that. There's your challenge. Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. Here we go. It's pretty straightforward. We're just going to go over to our XML file and drag in a button. Really doesn't matter where it goes. Oops. Change the text to get location. And then I'll change the onClick method to get location. And then we just have to go back and write the code for that. So I'll do it down here. We're creating a public method that's not returning anything called getLocation. It's being called by a view. Not that we're particularly interested in the view. And then so here is going to be our getLocation code. And then what we're going to use is location, 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 only twice. And then, actually we don't need to cast this as anything, location manager dot get last known location. So if you didn't work out where we got that code from, it's exactly the same code that I gave you just here, where we got the location right at the beginning. Okay, so now we've got the location. There's two ways that we could deal with that. One is essentially copy this code to get the latitude and longitude and then display the information. Or we could be lazy and just call the onLocationChanged method with the location that we've just got. Because there's nothing too special about this onLocationChanged method. It's just a plain old method. It just happens to get called whenever the location is changed. But we can use it whenever we like. So if we call that method here, then it will pass the location that we've just got, so the last known location, to this method, which in our case will just get the latitude and longitude and display it in the logs. And that's it. So let's just run that. And we should now find that we can get the location at will, not just when it's updated. So location is achieved, wonderful. Tap get location, and there it is. Latitude and longitude, so 0, 0. Just to make sure that is working. GeoFix 50/50. So we get that from our updated location, and then if we click get location, we should get it again. There we go. Fantastic, so that's how you work with location in Android. In the next video, we'll see how to combine both maps and location and get the holy grail of showing the user's location updated live on a map. See you there.